Hello, Timber Rattlers fans, and welcome to this special edition of the 2020 Wisconsin Timber Rattlers Welcome Home Banquet. On Wednesday, April 8th, we were going to have a dinner and welcome the team home and have a special guest, but events have kind of forced us to come up with something a little different, and that's what we have planned for you here today. It's a virtual Welcome Home Banquet for the 2020 season. And at this time, I would like to welcome in Milwaukee Brewers broadcaster Lane Grindle. Lane, welcome to the ballpark.
Well, Chris, it's always a pleasure. As you know, I love coming up your way. I usually try to get up there once or twice over the course of every summer. I love what the Wisconsin Timber Rattlers have been able to do in terms of attracting fans. It's a great atmosphere. And I want to say congratulations to you as well, because you celebrated a 20th anniversary as the voice of the T-Rats earlier this week. And I think that's a pretty cool accomplishment, and it's worth pointing out also.
Yeah, it's been, this is actually my 21st Welcome Home Banquet, and I'm glad you can be a part of it. I'm glad everybody at home can be a part of it, and thank you very much for that, Lane. So I wanted to start this off. A couple of years ago, we had Tom Flanagan as our guest for the Welcome Home Banquet. And my first question to him was, when I found out he had been a Milwaukee Brewers bat boy growing up, I asked him how I could become a Milwaukee Brewers bat boy. So how can I become a Milwaukee Brewers Major League broadcaster?
Well, that's a great question. Everybody has had different paths, obviously, to the big leagues. And mine's pretty unique, as you know well, Chris. It's not the traditional path to the big leagues. And I kind of knew that as I was going through the process of working my way up the broadcasting ladder. When I was in college, that's when I fully decided to invest in my career as a broadcaster. I always knew it was something that I maybe wanted to do. I was always the PA guy growing up. When I was in junior high, I did the public address for the Little League football team, who I didn't play for anymore because I played for the junior high team. And then when I got into high school, I did the public address for the junior high team. And then when I was on the varsity, I did the public address for the JV, and just kind of continued to do that throughout the years. And I got very comfortable behind a microphone as a result of that. And people always encouraged me that I should go into broadcasting in some way, shape, or form. And I don't know that I was 100% locked in that that's what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to be in sports. I knew I wanted to be involved in sports. And after my freshman year of college, that's when it kind of clicked to me that, you know what, I think the best opportunity for me to be involved in sports is going to be as a broadcaster. And so I got an internship after my sophomore year of college with 1620 The Zone in Omaha. It was an ESPN radio affiliate in Omaha, Nebraska. And I worked for them for an entire summer, and I was hooked. I knew that I loved it, and I went back to school at the University of South Dakota that fall, got a part-time job at the flagship affiliate for the University of South Dakota, and the owner there was a great guy named Kevin Culhane. He kept giving me more and more opportunities. He kept saying, well, if you think you can do this, then do it. And so I would come to him with all these crazy off-the-wall ideas. I wanted to launch my own high school football scoreboard show. I wanted to start doing American Legion baseball on the radio stations. And he kept saying yes, so I kept asking. And pretty soon I was getting to do a lot of hands-on stuff while I was still in college, and it benefited me greatly. And I made a lot of connections throughout that time, but none greater than the one that I made as an intern at 1620 The Zone when it all started. I worked for a guy named Kevin Kugler, who was the sports director at 1620 The Zone. You know him now. He's on BTN. He does Westwood One Radio, and he became a lifelong friend. He's my best friend to this day, and he has been great at giving me a lot of advice along the way. And he kind of helped me get my foot in the door at the University of Nebraska, and I got a job with them at the age of 24. And within a couple of years, I was doing the play-by-play for the University of Nebraska baseball on a 22-station network. And that's when everything really started to take off for me. And I was there for 10 years. It was an unbelievable experience. I grew up a Husker fan. I grew up in that area. So it's kind of always what I wanted to do. And I didn't think I was ever going to leave. We had just built a home, my wife and I. We had 4 kids. We were really established in our parish in Lincoln. And we never thought we were going to leave for a second. We were going to stay and be Lincoln lifers, if you will. But 2 years after we built that home, the Brewers opportunity opened up. And I knew that if I was going to get a Major League Baseball job, having not done the minor league route like most of Major League Baseball broadcasters have done, I knew I was going to have to find the right opportunity. It was probably going to need to be a Midwestern city. Well, Milwaukee checked that box. it was going to have to be as a number 3 and not as a true number 2. And this opportunity checked that box. And I went to work on it. I applied and I kept making it to the next round until finally I was having breakfast with Bob Uecker one morning in the middle of February in Phoenix, Arizona. And that's when I kind of knew this thing is probably going to happen. And it was a whirlwind of about a 3-week ordeal from when I applied to when I got offered the job. And it was a no-brainer. When Major League Baseball comes calling, you answer the phone. And so that's what we did as a family, and we moved to Milwaukee, and it's been the best decision we've ever made. The Brewers organization is such a family organization. The way they made us feel welcome and helped us get established in the city and in our own community and within the Brewers family, I'll never forget it, because it made this whole transition with 4 children so much easier. And this is home for us now, and we love it here, and we love the organization, and we're so thankful we're a part of it.
You mentioned growing up in Iowa and being a Huskers fan, but Iowa doesn't have any major professional sports teams. Were there any? What was your team growing up? Your pro team? Who were some of the players that you really enjoyed when you were growing up and getting interested in sports?
So I grew up about 3 hours north of Kansas City. So I was really right on the Iowa-Nebraska border, on the Iowa side, just outside of Omaha, Nebraska, growing up. So I was growing up in the Nebraska heyday from a football standpoint. So the mid-'90s, I mean, Tom Osborne and his teams. So you're a Husker fan. That was the pro team in that area, basically, for most people. And I know a lot of Hawkeye and Cyclone fans won't like to hear this, but so many people in Southwest Iowa gravitated to Nebraska during that time. But from a baseball standpoint, I was a Royals fan. I grew up a Royals fan. My grandpa was a huge Royals fan. And he had a big satellite dish back in the day. And, of course, this was before it was easy to get games. And so I would listen to Denny Matthews, who now, of course, I've had a chance to be around and meet and get to know a little bit over the last 4 years, which is wild to me because I grew up listening to Denny Matthews and Fred White call baseball on the Royals radio network. And my affiliate was KMA 960 in Shenandoah, Iowa. And I would listen to them every night, pop popcorn, drink RC Cola, because that's what my grandpa would drink back in the day. And then my grandpa lived about 1.5 miles from me, and my grandpa and my dad farmed together. And so I could run through a field and get to his house. And he had this big satellite dish. And so anytime the Royals were on TV, I would run across this field, and Grandpa and I would sit, and then he would drive me home when it was dark after the game was over. And that was a tradition of ours. And he taught me a ton about the game of baseball, my grandpa did. He was a great player himself. My other grandpa was also a diehard baseball fan, a diehard Royals fan. And so he taught me a lot about the game, and he taught me a lot about the Royals too. And he was always the eternal optimist. I mean, growing up a Royals fan, those are tough times. I mean, 85, I was 4 years old, so I didn't remember much about 85, but the 90s weren't so friendly, and the early 2000s were downright brutal as a Royals fan. And so every year my grandpa Scott would tell me, oh, I'll tell you what, the Royals are going to be good this year. And I would have to kind of like slow down. Like, no, probably not. Look at their roster. They're not quite there yet. They were always rebuilding. And my grandpa Doc, he loved them, but he was a little bit more realistic about their outlook probably most years. Obviously, I grew up a George Brett fan. How can you not? He was a great player. He was fun to watch. I loved the way he played the game. By the time I was really getting locked in, he had moved from third base to first base a little bit, and he was playing more first base. But I met a player. So the AAA affiliate for the Royals was the Omaha Royals. Of course, they're the Omaha Storm Chasers now. And I met at an Omaha Royals game at Rosenblatt Stadium because we would go to a lot of those games. And I asked my grandpa Doc, he was taking me to an Omaha Royals game, and I said, who's a player that's going to be in the big leagues that I should watch tonight? And he said, I really think Bill Pecota is going to be a really good player someday, and I think he's got a chance to make the big leagues, and I think you should watch him tonight. So I watched Bill Pecota that whole night, who he was a third baseman himself. And after the game was over, I wanted to meet Bill Pecota. So we hung around, and we ended up meeting his in-laws and his wife, and then he came out into the stands above the third base dugout and spent some time with me and signed a baseball for me. And I was a Bill Pecota fan, which is ironic, for life. So when they traded him to the Mets and the Saberhagen deal, I bawled my eyes out. I was so upset. I wasn't going to be a Royals fan anymore for about 2 hours, and then I was back on the train. But those were kind of the guys early on that I really liked. Of course, you love George Brett. Of course, you love Frank White, Willie Wilson, all of those names. But I really liked George Brett, and then Bill Pecota was my more obscure name that I really followed and I really enjoyed watching. I loved when Jermaine Dye was a Kansas City Royal. Carlos Beltran, of course. Those years were some years of optimism because they really had some good talent that you felt like they had a chance to turn a corner, and then they never really did. But then the ironic thing for me, to kind of go back to that fandom, is 2014 and 2015 happened for the Kansas City Royals. And in 2014, I went to the AL wildcard game between the A's and the Royals, which is one of the best sporting events I've ever been to. And then, of course, they make the miraculous run to the World Series, and I went to Game 4 of the ALCS, and then I went to Games 1 and 7 of the World Series. Both were Royals losses. And then in 2015, I was covering college football at the time, so you were really at the mercy of how the home and away schedule in the postseason worked out for the Royals if you wanted to go to games. And the only one I could go to was, I think it was a Tuesday night Game 2 in the World Series, the Johnny Cueto game where the Royals shut down the Mets in that World Series and went on and won, of course, in 5 games in 2015. So that was my life as a Royals fan. It culminated in back-to-back World Series, and then they win it in 15, and I got to go to all these games. And a couple of months later, I was interviewing for the Brewers job. So it was like the ultimate mic drop as a fan. It was like, okay, they won the World Series. This is great. Now I'm going to go work in Major League Baseball myself. And the irony for me is that now Lorenzo Cain, who I watched and cheered for so hard for all of those years when he was in Kansas City, and Mike Moustakas, who's, of course, now he's moved on to the Cincinnati Reds, but for the year and a half that he was in the Brewers clubhouse, I mean, those were guys that I was a huge fan of. I have pictures of my oldest daughter, Josie, doing the moose antlers when he was a Kansas City Royal when she was like 3 years old. And so I showed those to Moose when he got traded to the Brewers in 2018. But those were my team. That was my team growing up. That's the team I loved to watch. I also just loved quality baseball. I think of the great World Series from my youth, the ones I really remember. And of course, you remember 89 because of the earthquake, and you remember 90 with the Reds. But I remember those Blue Jays teams of the early 90s and just loving watching them play. The Joe Carter, Tony Fernandez, who we just lost, of course, Paul Molitor, John Olerud on those teams, Pat Borders at catcher. Those were teams that I really loved watching. Devon White in center field. I absolutely love those teams. Not necessarily as a fan. They were entertaining to watch. Great pitching staff, of course, as well. And then all those Braves teams, too. The Terry Pendleton, David Justice Braves teams were really fun for me to watch, and I really enjoyed watching those teams, too. And, of course, they were almost like the Bills in the NFL at the same time. I mean, they were getting to the World Series, and they weren't winning the World Series, and they finally were able to win that World Series over the Indians later. But it was fun growing up in that era. Baseball was good. Of course, the strike happened in 94, and that was tough. But then it came roaring back with the home run races, and I was blessed. But yeah, the Royals were my team, and there was really no other team. I mean, the Royals were my team through and through, growing up and through my adult life until I got the job at the Brewers.
I think a lot of people would consider you blessed because you got prime Bo Jackson too. I mean,
yeah.
you were a little young maybe at the time, but the talent that he had must have really stood out even to your eyes back then.
Yeah, I loved Bo Jackson. I remember reading a biography on Bo Jackson as a kid and reading about his career at Auburn and when he was coming up through the Royal system and playing for the Memphis Chicks, all of that great stuff. And I still remember his injury with the Raiders. Obviously, I was a Chiefs fan. And I remember watching the Raiders and seeing Bo Jackson being helped off the field, and it didn't look like it was that big a deal. And so you're like, oh, well, he'll be back probably before this game's over. And his career was essentially ended. I know he came back and played for the White Sox in baseball later on, but he was never the same. It's really too bad. He's one of the greatest athletes of our generation and maybe of all time. And I don't know that he's going to always be remembered that way because of the shortened career. If he plays a full career, who knows what kind of numbers he puts up in both of those sports. Just an amazing talent. And it goes beyond just the power and the speed. I mean, he had an unbelievable arm. We always think about the throw home where he gets Harold Reynolds with the Seattle Mariners. I mean, we still see that highlight all the time. The dude had immense talent and potential, and you never knew what he was going to do. Those are the kind of guys that I still enjoy to this day. the guys that when you show up to the ballpark, you're like, he could do something special at any given moment today. And Bo Jackson was one of those guys. The Brewers are lucky. They have a couple of those guys right now. Lorenzo Cain is one of those guys, especially defensively. But Christian Yelich, of course, is one of those guys, too, where you just never know what he's going to do. He could hit 4 home runs today because that's possible. He's that good of a player.
There is a little Appleton tie with the Royals, obviously, with the Old Foxes being a Royals farm team. Tom Gordon came up through here. Joe Randa came up through here. So I'll see if I can find some of those old baseball cards for you there, Lane, okay?
I would love that. Tom Gordon, of course, was another favorite of mine as a starting pitcher, then later in the bullpen, and he was great. And an old boss of mine was the traveling secretary for those Kansas City Royals, and he always talks about how Tom Gordon was one of the greatest guys that he ever worked with, how great he was, and how well he treated him. And so I've always been a Tom Gordon fan. And Joe Randa with that smirk every time he stepped into the batter's box, the Joker. I always loved Joe Randa at third base too.
Let's go forward to Nebraska. You're calling the play-by-play for the baseball team, and they make the NCAA regionals your first year. Now, they had been in the College World Series. I know Jamal Strong played here. A few former Nebraska Cornhuskers came through when the Timber Rattlers were a Mariners affiliate. John Cole, who was an All-American.
Yep.
What was it like getting to call the games and get into the NCAA tournament that first year you were in the Cornhuskers booth?
Well, it was an honor to get into that booth, and I think probably for a lot of people that don't follow college baseball, and especially during that era, they don't understand what Nebraska baseball was during that time. It was a big deal. It was a 24-station radio network, ratings through the roof, sponsorship sales were really high. And it was a team that was drawing, 6,000-7,000 fans routinely for their games. And for the big weekend series, they were packing in 10 grand at a lot of their games, whether it was Texas A&M or Oklahoma coming through or those big Texas series against some of those great Texas teams. They were packing Haymarket Park to capacity a lot. And so it was a huge honor when I got named one of the play-by-play voices for the University of Nebraska, and I had a really good run there. The success started to really kind of go down after I got there, unfortunately. I got there in 2006. I was the pre- and post-game host. 2007, I called a limited number of games play-by-play and still was the pre- and post-game host. And in 2006, they had Jabba Chamberlain at the front part of the rotation. Their Saturday starter was Tony Watson, and their Sunday starter was a guy named Johnny Dorn, who was really good too. He was a really good college pitcher, freshman All-American the year before. So they had a loaded starting rotation in 2006, but they got beat in the regionals. They went 2-Q in the regionals and being a top 8 national seed. And then in 2007, they went to Arizona State and they lost in the regionals as well. So 2008 was just getting to the regionals was a minimum expectation for Nebraska baseball. And they had a really good year. They won 40-plus games. I think they finished – I want to say they finished third in the Big 12 Conference that year. And they ended up getting a number 1 seed, not a top 8 national seed, but a number 1 seed where they hosted their regional. And huge crowds, unbelievable atmosphere. And they ended up winning their first game. Dan Jennings, the former Brewer, got the start in their first game of the regional that year. And then they lost a Saturday night game to UC Irvine in what was really one of the better baseball games that I got a call in college baseball. And then they came back and they lost to Oral Roberts on that Sunday and got eliminated again. And they didn't get back to the regionals again, I want to say until 2014. Mm-hmm. So 09, 10, 11, 12, and 13, they didn't make the regionals again, which was unheard of. I mean, they went from being one of the programs in college baseball over about a 10-year period. Dave Van Horn, who's, of course, the legendary head coach of Arkansas, got it all started. And Rob Childress was the pitching coach. He's the head coach at A&M now. Mike Anderson was the head coach at Nebraska. And once it started going downhill, they just couldn't quite piece it all back together. And then Darren Erstad became the head coach in 2012. 2011, Darren Erstad was the volunteer assistant, and he worked with the hitters that year. And in 2011, UCLA came in to Lincoln in early March, and it was 32 degrees for a Friday afternoon game against the UCLA Bruins, and Garrett Cole was on the mound. And he was throwing 98, 99 miles an hour in the ninth inning. This is a California kid now, from UCLA, and he was firing 98, 99 in the ninth inning of that game. And UCLA won game one. Then Trevor Bauer was on the mound on Saturday, and the Huskers actually beat him on Saturday, a low-scoring game. It was like 3-2. And then they came back and they beat Adam Plutko, who also became a big league pitcher for the Cleveland Indians, on that Sunday. And it looked like, maybe Nebraska was kind of putting everything back together. UCLA had been in the National Championship Series the year before, and then they just never really got it going that year either, and ended up missing the Big 12 tournament again. They made a coaching change, and then Darren took over as the head coach. And so I got to work with Darren in 2012, 13, 14, and 15 before I got the job with the Brewers. In fact, Darren was one of the first calls I made when I found out that I had been selected to get an interview with the Brewers. And he was so excited for me, and he was like, whatever I got to do, what can I do to help you get this job? And so I'll always remember the support he gave me there. But it was fun to work around Darren, and I really think working around Darren for those years prepared me for the Major League Baseball style, and it was invaluable for me because he was a big league guy, and he ran that program like a college program, but there were a lot of similarities to what the big leagues are like with Darren, a little bit more so than maybe the previous regime and how they ran things. And so it really helped prepare me for life with the Brewers once I got here.
Yeah, you bring up Darren Erstad. That was one of the big changes when you were there, but another was going from the Big 12 to the Big 10 for Nebraska baseball. Just what was that whole transition like, not just for the baseball team, but for the whole athletics department down there for Nebraska coming to Big 10 country now?
It was a huge change. I mean, financially, it was a lucrative change because the TV contracts and the markets that are in the Big Ten Conference are bigger markets, and the TV contracts are a little bit more lucrative, and the way that they share it in the Big Ten was a little bit more equitable as well compared to how the Big 12 was divvying up their TV revenue when Nebraska left. And it was kind of an ugly split from the Big 12 at the time. I think a lot of those temperatures have cooled now, and I think everybody has maybe seen the light and realized that teams like Kansas State and Kansas should be playing Nebraska in some of the sports. There's nothing wrong with that. And so it's starting to get a little bit more normal now, and some of those feelings that were there when Nebraska left have maybe dissipated to a degree, which I think is a good thing for everybody. But the move to the Big Ten is also exciting because all of a sudden Penn State's coming to town, Ohio State's coming to town, the Badgers are coming to town. And those were new brands and big brands that Nebraska fans were excited about seeing. They were excited about traveling to those places and seeing those historical stadiums and those other great fan bases. And so from a football standpoint, Nebraska has not had the success in the Big Ten Conference that they had even in the Big 12, and certainly not what they had in the Big 8. But they've made some changes, and I think they're going in a better direction there. And so hopefully they'll have some better days in the Big Ten moving forward. But I think, if you take the on-field success or lack thereof out of the equation, overall it's been a good fit. Nebraska is now peers with a lot of unbelievable universities and institutions, and they have these incredible fan bases that are a lot like Nebraska's in many ways. And so it's been a good marriage in that way. From a baseball standpoint, it was a tough transition. It was not such a tough transition in terms of competition. Nebraska was recruiting a different caliber of athlete. They had a different set of expectations, even coming off the lack of success that they had had for 5 years coming into the Big Ten. And I think there was even a little bit of a thought, not necessarily from the head coach and the players, but from the fans, that this was going to be easy in the Big Ten for baseball because the Big Ten doesn't promote baseball the same way that the Big 12 does. It doesn't encourage baseball the same way that the Big 12 does. It wasn't a mandatory sport. And so I think a lot of people thought this was going to be easy, and it was anything but. The pitching in the Big Ten might not have been quite what it was in the Big 12. You had guys like Michael Wacha, Ross Stripling, Max Scherzer. You can just keep going down the list. There were Aaron Crow, a ton of unbelievable Friday night, Saturday night guys in the Big 12 Conference. And you didn't see as many of those guys in the Big Ten, but the Big Ten could hit. And when Nebraska got in, those Indiana teams with Kyle Schwarber and Sam Travis, who's probably going to be in the big leagues this year, he's been climbing up the ladder with the Boston Red Sox. They had some amazing teams. Micah Johnson, who, of course, played in the big leagues. Indiana had legitimate teams, and they ended up going to the College World Series in 2014. In 2013. So they had some really good teams, did Indiana, and it was a lot tougher than I think Nebraska fans thought it was going to be once they got into the Big Ten. The most disappointing thing was that there just wasn't an emphasis on the sport internally from the institutions. I mean, very few places even charged for admission. Game was set to start at 1:05, and that was more of a ish. And after
We've all
one
been
year,
there.
well, after 1 year of that, I think Nebraska's attention to detail from a baseball standpoint and their emphasis on the sport and their caring for the sport, I do think it lifted everybody up a little bit. And the Big Ten today, compared to what it was in 2012 when it comes to college baseball, is night and day. New facilities have been built. Great coaches have been hired. It's a much more competitive sport within the scope of the national scene. It's still not the Big 12 or the SEC, but it is a multi-bid league now. It was kind of a 1 or 2 bid league before. Now it's a 3, 4, 5 bid league. I think some of the money from the TV contracts is starting to find its way into college baseball a little bit more in the Big Ten, and I think it's a much stronger sport, and I think it has a good future as well in the Big Ten Conference. And I don't think Nebraska is the only reason that's happened. I don't want to oversell that, but I do think it's helped that a member institution came in that said, we really care about baseball. And I think it really made some other people uncomfortable, and it made them work a little bit harder. And as a result, you've seen Ohio State take steps forward in baseball, and you've seen Indiana build a new facility and go to the College World Series and really be one of the class teams in the Big Ten Conference. And Minnesota, who's always been strong, has taken that extra step. And so I do think that the conference has a bright future.
One last Nebraska question, and then we'll move to more current stuff. But you were the public address announcer for the football team. How many times did you actually say Melvin Gordon carries the football the day that he had 400 yards against the Huskers football team?
Well, so I only did the public address for 1 year.
Okay.
2015, the first year of Mike Riley. It was a crazy set of circumstances that led to it. I was the sideline reporter for the Husker football radio network.
Okay.
And I kind of got forced into duty for home games as the PA public address announcer. Sean Eichhorst, who was the AD at Nebraska at the time, director of athletics, a former Wisconsin guy and a Wisconsin native. Sean came to me and just said, we really need you. It was a week before the first game. Who they had hired before to be the PA guy for that year because he was replacing somebody else. Some things happened where they couldn't go with that person, and so they needed somebody, and they needed somebody now. And he had to convince me a little bit, but when the director of athletics asks you to do it, you realize I better do this. So I did the PA that year. That was not the year that Gordon ran wild.
That was the year before.
That was the year 14. Before,
right? And
that was actually in Madison, and I was on the sidelines for that, and that was the most amazing performance I've ever seen. I tell people this all the time, and I felt this way before I ever got the job at the Brewers. Going to Madison for a football game is one of the cool experiences in college football. I've been all over the place. I've been to almost every major venue in college football. I've been to Penn State. I've been to Ohio State, Texas A&M. I've been to Oklahoma. I've been to Texas. I've been to UCLA and Pasadena to play the Bruins in football. And Madison is as good as it is, in my opinion, in terms of the atmosphere around the stadium before a game, in terms of the atmosphere in the stadium. Jump around is one of the coolest things you'll ever see. And it's one of those things that when it happens, the first time I was there was in 2011. That was the Russell Wilson team that was unreal. Mm-hmm. And I remember the first time, the Badgers are rolling up the Huskers in this game, and jump around starts, and you look at our sideline, at the Nebraska sideline at the time, and you just see all these mouths just because they're like, this is cool. We're getting our butts kicked right now, but this is neat. It's a really unique, cool tradition, and it's just a cool atmosphere. It's a little hostile at times, but that's okay. That's kind of part of the fun of college football. And I'd put it up against anywhere I've been, to be honest with you. I really would. A&M's really special. That's a cool place when they lock their arms and start swaying during their fight song. That's one of those jaw drop moments where it's like, this is so cool. The stadium starts swaying as well. Of course, you'll feel the vibrations at Camp Randall also. But that night in 2014, when Gordon ran wild, poof, that was as amazing of a performance as I've ever seen. And of course, that was coming on the heels of the 2012 title game in Indianapolis, when a 6-6 Wisconsin team came to Indianapolis. Nebraska had beat them earlier in the year in a comeback in Lincoln, and they put up 70-something on Nebraska, and Gordon was a big part of that. Everybody got involved in that. I mean, James White was heavily involved, and Monte Ball too. But really, really amazing. Melvin Gordon, one of the best talents I've ever seen in college football.
You mentioned earlier that you got a chance to meet Bob Uecker, and just reading some stuff when you were interviewing for the job, the traditional final interview is a meal with Bob Uecker. And just take us through what that whole last interview and meeting him and I guess getting the seal of approval to get hired is like for you, was like for you.
Well, it was a little nerve-wracking. I'm not going to lie. And I was coming up against the start of the college baseball season. So it was late in the game. Camp had already opened up for spring training. Games hadn't started yet, but camp had already opened up. So I had to go to College of Charleston for a baseball series the weekend. I got called by the Brewers, I think it was on Thursday, and they said, "Can you get on a plane tomorrow and come down and have dinner with Bob?" And I said, "Look, I really don't want to make a habit of telling Bob Uecker no, but I have to go tomorrow morning to Charleston, South Carolina for a baseball series, and I would feel bad, not taking care of my obligation there this late in the game. I feel like I need to go do that series. Can I go meet with him Monday morning after the series is over, or Monday sometime?" And they said, "No, that's fine. That's perfectly fine." So I went to College of Charleston. I called a college baseball series, and I had a pretty good idea that I was getting to the finish line on the Brewers job at that point. And so I kind of let Darren know I thought things were trending in a good direction. And I knew in the back of my mind that those could be the last games that I was going to be calling for Nebraska. And so it was a little sentimental at the time that I was calling those games. And so we finished up the series, and then I got on a plane and I flew back to Lincoln. And then I ended up meeting with Bob Tuesday morning, because then I flew Monday afternoon down to Phoenix, stayed in the hotel Monday night, and then got up Tuesday morning and we had breakfast. And I'll always remember sitting at the table and seeing Bob pull up and get out of his car and watch him walk in. And it was a little nerve-wracking. It's like, holy cow, that's Bob Uecker walking in here. Like, that is Bob Uecker. And it didn't take long before I wasn't nervous anymore. When he walked up and he stuck his hand out and shook my hand, and we sat down and he launched into story time. He made you feel comfortable so fast. It was really incredible. And that's what he has the ability to do. People talk about all the talents that Bob has, and he's an unbelievable storyteller, the best storyteller I've ever been around in my life. And I mean, there's nobody that's even a close second in terms of telling stories. He's one of the best entertainers. He's the best entertainer I've ever been around in my life. He's the funniest man I've ever been around in my life. But he has an ability to make you feel comfortable, and he has an ability to connect with you in a way that very few people can. And I think that's one of the reasons why he is who he is, and why he is larger than life in a lot of people's eyes. So it was a really fun morning. And we sat and we talked and we drank, I don't know how many cups of coffee. I think my hands were doing this at the end, but it wasn't because I was nervous. I had so much caffeine in me. But we probably sat for 2.5 hours or more, getting to know each other, telling stories. And it was a lot of me listening, to be honest with you, but then a lot of me answering questions that he had for me. And when we stood up at the end, he stuck his hand out and said, "I'm looking forward to working with you." And I felt like, well, that's probably a pretty good sign. And, then the season started. I went back to Lincoln and we started packing up the house. And I think I got the official offer a couple of days later. But we kind of knew at that point that this is where we're at. And we got the house on the market. And then I joined spring training like a week late that year, because we just had so many odds and ends we had to tie up. Bless my wife, 4 kids. She basically had a newborn in my son Luke. And she pretty much packed up the house, sold the house, did everything, taught full time, raised 4 kids. while I was at spring training. It was unbelievable what she was able to do. And I found out right away that in the baseball life, I mean, you have to have a really strong, supportive wife if you're going to have a family. And she's an all-star. I mean, she really is. She's the MVP of our house, and it's not even close. And that's not lip service. That's not cliche. She's amazing. And this whole move to Milwaukee, it couldn't have happened without her, and it would have been miserable without her. And so the season started, and I got to Arizona. I went back and forth a couple of times to help tie up some loose ends back home, and then we got the season started, and it took me a little bit to find my footing. It's my first time in big league baseball, and here is Bob Uecker in the same booth as me, and I'm trying to stay out of everybody's way. And it wasn't very long into the season where Bob's like, "Hey man, we don't worry about anything here. Just you can be yourself. You can say what you want. Don't put a filter. Just have fun. This is fun, and let's have fun." And from that point on, that's kind of what I did. I said, "Okay, I'm going to. Who's not going to listen to Bob Uecker?" And I would put. I know I don't need to make a bet here. I know for a fact that there's not another radio broadcast team in Major League Baseball or anywhere in the country that has as much fun as we do. And I don't mean that in an arrogant way at all. It's just we're always laughing. And a lot of times we're laughing at something that Bob has said or a story he's told, but we are always laughing. And we know when to dial it in, obviously, and get serious and call the game. I mean, that's still the priority. But we make it fun, and I'm really proud of that. And it's because of him. I mean, he sets the tone. It's his broadcast, and we're a part of it. But it's an unbelievable honor to be around him on a daily basis. I've learned a ton from him, and I wasn't sure as a young broadcaster how much is this guy going to really mentor me or pull me aside and talk to me about what he's heard me say on the road or anything like that. And he's been great in that regard. He has helped me a lot. And so it's turned into an unbelievable friendship. And I know Jeff Levering would say the same thing. I mean, Jeff gets to work with him every day. I've worked with Bob about 8 times on the air. The rest of the time I'm talking to him in the back of the booth and we're having fun. We're not on air as much together. And Jeff, gets the unbelievable honor of being on air with him pretty much nightly over the course of the season. But we're all really good friends. We all support each other, and he just sets such an unbelievable tone for what we do, and he makes it so much fun. I mean, I can't wait to get in the car and drive to the ballpark every day, because it's kind of like what I was saying about Yelich and Kane and Bo Jackson. You never know what's going to happen today when you're in the booth with you. Something fun, something crazy off the wall that's unexpected could happen, and it could be a lifetime memory as a result of it. And so it's really fun. And he is one of my favorite people I've ever been around in my life. And he's really turned into a great friend, and I'm honored to know him.
That first year, the Brewers, for lack of a better word, everybody expect them to tank, and it was going to be a 100-loss season. But then they're at the 500 mark for most of the year. The following year, which is your second year, they miss out to the Rockies by a game for the wild card. But those first 2 years kind of built everything forward to the 2018 season and the NLCS Championship Series run. Did you see the turning point in there for the Brewers, in those first 2 years that would lead to that third season where they would have so much success?
Well, I remember everybody during spring training of 2016, whether it was national media or who else, expecting the Brewers to lose 100 games that year. And I was still getting my feet wet, and so I was just glad to be calling baseball at the major league level. And you get a month into the season, you're like, these guys aren't that bad. And then you get 2 months into the season, and you're like, these guys are okay. And then it's early June, and they're 2 games under 500, and they're 2.5 games out of the wild card, and you're like, are they going to have decisions to make if they keep this up for another month and a half? And then it ultimately resolved itself. They went on a California swing in mid-June, and it was kind of a tough stretch. And that got them where you didn't have to worry about that anymore, where you knew they weren't going to make the postseason. And so then they could focus on making the moves they had to make at the July 31 deadline. But even the fact that was still kind of in the back of your head in early June was amazing. And that is a credit to Craig Counsell and the culture that he set. when he became the manager of the Brewers, and he had 2015, and it's the rest of the rest of the 2015 season after he took over in early May in 2015. But I really think what he did in the spring of 2016 is where the foundation really got laid. And that team overachieved in 2016. They weren't supposed to be a 73-win team, and that might not sound like much, but that was a pretty good accomplishment for that group of guys. There's a bunch of journeymen and Ryan Braun, and you had Jonathan Villar, who had a nice season that year, and you found a couple of other pieces here and there, but for the most part, there weren't thought to be that many pieces of the next winning Brewers team on that 2016 team when they broke camp. And yet, Hernan Perez turned into a really nice piece, and Chase Anderson obviously finished that year very strong on the mound, and you thought, okay, here's a guy. And they had a very strong farm system at that point in time. So 2017 rolls around, and I was cautiously optimistic that this could be like a 500 type of team. And of course, we know they were 10 games over 500. They finished a game out of the wild card. And after they made the moves for Kane and Yelich after the 2017 season, I think that was January 26th. It was a couple of days before On Deck, Kane and Yelich Day, as we like to call it now. I really felt like from that point, that's a playoff team. That is a postseason team, and the Brewers are in it to win it. Like, this is a postseason or bust season for the Brewers. And I never felt at any point during the 2018 season that they weren't going to make the postseason. I didn't always know if they were going to win the NL Central, but I always felt like this is a postseason team, and they're a dangerous team if they get in. And that proved to be true. They came a game short of the World Series. Then they loaded up a little bit more coming into last year. And, of course, were able to make back-to-back postseason appearances, and some tough luck, keeps them out of winning the wild card. I watched that game again the other night. I don't know why I did that to myself, but it was on. And it makes you sick because you realize that the Brewers, in some ways, if they have a healthy Christian Yelich, that team by the end of the year, the way they were playing, is probably better than the 2018 team, in all honesty. I mean, they had some dynamite arms like Brandon Woodruff, who had emerged. And, of course, you had Yasmani Grandal, who was a great piece at catcher. If that team is 100% healthy, which we know they weren't going to be in the wild card. I mean, the Yelich injury had happened 3 weeks earlier, but it just really felt like that was a team that could have been really, really dangerous. And you go see the Nationals go on and win the World Series. So, really, it's been an amazing run for me. I've been lucky. I kind of got in at the ground floor of the rebuild, and it was a fast one, and we went, boom, here right away. And I'm excited to see what the 2020 season holds, because this is a really deep team, and you still have elite talent like Yelich. I think Brandon Woodruff's an elite talent on the mound. Obviously, Josh Hader's an elite talent on the mound as well, and you can keep going through it. Guys like Adrian Hauser have a chance to take a huge step forward, in my opinion, and be a really quality starting pitcher. But I like this team a lot. Keston Hiura is an elite hitter, but they have great depth, and they have a lot of platoon options, and I think that stuff matters over the course of a season. So I'm excited to see what this team can do, see if they can make it 3 years in a row in the postseason.
I wanted to go back to 2018 for Timber Rattlers fans, because I think one of the best debuts by a Brewers pitcher is a former Timber Rattler in Freddy Peralta on Mother's Day in Colorado. And that's a road trip game. You and Jeff were out there, and Freddie all of a sudden is out there striking out 13 Rockies and taking a no-hitter deep into the ball game. And that whole, Freddie is one of the nicest guys you would ever want to meet, coming up from the Timber Rattlers in 2016. And then less than 2 years later, he's doing that for in his major league debut for the Brewers. And that was a special day. I had a chance to listen to you guys because I was driving home. We had an off day. I was driving home from Mother's Day. But that was quite a performance, and it had to have been special to be able to call that.
It really was. And I remember coming to Appleton in 2016 and interviewing Freddie when he was a T-Rat, and coming away so impressed with him as a person, just smiling, infectious personality, just a happy-go-lucky kid that loved the game of baseball. And it just, you could spend 5 minutes with him and you knew it. And I was like, man, that's the kind of kid I like to be around, because I know he is appreciating the moment. Like he gets it. This is so fun. This is cool. I'm getting paid to play baseball, and I'm making this journey to the big leagues. And so I really followed him closely from that point forward because he made such an impression on me. And I went back in 2017 and I saw him with the Mudcats and I interviewed him again. And I watched him pitch and I felt like the stuff was really there. Like, this is a guy that has a chance to be a big leaguer and a really good big leaguer. So then a year later, here he is making his debut, which was, I think, a lot faster than most people thought. And we didn't know what to expect coming into that one. And here he is. He comes out, gets off to the great start. Now it's a good Rockies team. I mean, that was a team that ended up being in the postseason. And anytime you're talking about Trevor Story and Nolan Arenado and Charlie Blackmon, I mean, that's a tough lineup at Coors Field to navigate. That's a really challenging assignment for a kid making his debut. But you could tell early on they weren't comfortable against him, and they weren't seeing his fastball at all. And he basically threw all fastballs. I think he mixed in 1 or 2 changeups and maybe a couple of curveballs in that outing, but otherwise it was all fastballs, and they couldn't do anything about it. And you could see early on, this is going to be a good day for him. Let's see how long he can go, but this is going to be a good day for Freddie. And it was special because of the pink uniforms, Mother's Day, his family being there, the tip of the cap he gave to Manny Pena afterwards, and how Manny managed him and made it simple for him so he wasn't overloading him with information in his major league debut. I just thought all of it and the way it came together was really a beautiful thing, and it was really cool. And it really is. It's, for me, in my 4 years doing radio for the Brewers, it's a top 5 game for me that I've had the privilege of calling. And just a neat kid that I'm always going to be a fan of and I'm always going to be pulling for. And I think he has a big future still. I know there's been some ups and downs, some inconsistencies since that day, but the stuff is still there. He's got that slider going now along with a curveball. He looked really good this spring. And I think Freddy Peralta still, before it's all said, he's still very young. And I think before it's all said and done, he's going to be an electric, dynamic arm for the Brewers before it's all said and done.
Another name you brought up was Keston Hiura, who's another former Timber Rattler in 2017. And then last year, getting to see him on a daily basis once he got called up the second time. The walk-off home run against the Cubs at Miller Park was a really special moment. But what about Keston Hiura? What have you seen from that former Timber Rattler in his short time in the majors?
Well, Keston's a great kid, and I have a funny story about Keston because we have a family day at Miller Park every year, and for us, like, our families get to really enjoy a ton of different things behind the scenes about Brewers baseball on that day. And one of the things that you get to do is your kids can run out with one of the players during starting lineups. And so my kids ran out with Keston last year, and my son, who is 4, at the time he was 3, he thought it was pretty neat. And he's a big Manny Pena fan, my son is, and Manny knows it. Manny treats him unbelievable. And but he's kind of getting to know who Keston Hiura was, because Keston had only been up for, at that point, maybe 2 months. And so when it was over, I came home that night after the game and talking to my son, and he said, "Hey, Dad, I got to stand with Keston Hiura during the national anthem." And I said, "That's really cool, buddy. Did Keston talk to you?" He goes, "Oh, yeah, he asked me, a bunch of questions." And I said, "What'd you think of it?" And he goes, "Well, do you think you would babysit me?" And I said, "Well, Keston might, because he's a really good guy, but we're not going to ask him to do that. It'll be fine." So that's always been the joke. I told Keston later, "Yeah, my son wants you to babysit him." But Keston's one of the purest hitters I've ever seen. And that was kind of that was the beat on Keston when he got drafted, that it was one of the best bats in that draft, and it's proven to be that way. I think the power that showed up last year was maybe a little bit surprising to some. I think everybody knew he could hit and hit for average, but the power's there too, and he really showed some good power last year. You talked about the walk-off off of Kimbrel against the Cubs. He hit his first home run down in Atlanta that he hooked inside the left field foul pole. Just a special talent. And defensively still getting there, but offensively, he's just, I was talking about that wild card game, and I was watching it the other night, and he comes up and he was 0 for 3 with 3 strikeouts in the 8th inning. And then I think Ernie Johnson said, "It's been a forgettable night so far for the rookie Keston Hiura." And like immediately after that, Ernie Johnson goes, "And it's turned into a memorable night," because he lines a double into the corner down the left field line. I mean, he is a really good hitter, and I think we tend to forget about him a little bit because we get so focused on Yelich and can Kane have the bounce back year offensively, And yeah, Mike Moustakas isn't here anymore. How do the Brewers move some of the pieces around? But I think we forget about how good Keston Hiura is and how he was only a rookie last year. This guy might take another jump, which is scary to think, but he might offensively, and he's going to have a big, big role in the Brewers offense in 2020 and beyond.
How closely does the broadcast team follow the minor leagues on a day-to-day basis? I know you said part of your thing was to travel around and follow some and get interviews with the teams or players at various affiliates, but you guys run the highlights on Sunday. You have the farm scoreboard after every game. The TV side, they always put up like a minor league star of the game, but how closely do you guys follow what's going on in Wisconsin or Colorado Springs or San Antonio, Biloxi, and Carolina?
Pretty closely. As you mentioned, we do a scoreboard every night, so we have a decent idea of what the teams are doing from a competitive standpoint. But then we pay pretty close attention to what the prospects are doing. The guys, especially the guys that you think can help you this year. I mean, I would be honest. I think that's where a lot of the focus is. But like last year, I was looking every night to see what Bryce Terang did when he was with the T-Rats, and then later when he got promoted up to be with the Mudcats, or in Ashby when he's starting. The guys that have a real chance to maybe move fairly quickly through the system and be up in the next couple of years, 3 years, whatever it might be for those younger guys. I think you pay close attention to those guys specifically, but then you have the group of guys in AAA or even a few in AA that might be able to help you this year. And so a Devin Williams last year, I mean, you're kind of circling that name and paying attention and seeing what he can do. Trent Grisham with the unbelievable year that he put together last year. I mean, those things catch your eye because there is so much movement now, Chris, between the big league club and the AAA club, and occasionally the AA club if one of those guys is on the 40-man. There is so much movement over the course of a season that you can't help but pay attention. It's part of the gig now, to be honest with you. So we do pay close attention to it, and I mean, I always know where the T-Rats are at in terms of the playoff race for them, and in terms of the West Division of the Midwest League. I mean, all that stuff. So we're paying attention to it, and we're seeing. I think it's fun for me to follow the T-Rats because you hit the draft, and then there's a lot of player movement, and guys are coming up from Helena, and guys maybe go from a week in the Arizona Rookie League to a week in Helena, and by the end of the year, they're so advanced for those two. Then all of a sudden, here they are in Wisconsin, and some of the college guys, obviously, as you know, Chris, are able to do that pretty quickly. So I love watching all that stuff and paying close attention to it.
With things as unsettled as they are right now, I mean, nobody really knows when the season's going to start just yet, but at spring, there were some minor leaguers that were having pretty good spring trainings. Who might be making their major league debuts here in 2020 once this all shakes out? I know a name, we called him Supak when he was here, but apparently now it's Shupak.
Yeah.
Trey was a name I heard you guys bring up on the broadcasts quite a bit. Are there any maybe former Timber Rattlers or guys in the organization that might be making their major league debuts this year?
Well, I think that's going to be really fun to watch and follow. I mean, a year ago at this time, if you told me Trent Grisham was going to make his debut, and not just make his debut, but have a huge impact on the Brewers, I probably wouldn't have believed you because he hadn't produced at that level yet in his career, and then there he was. So. I think that you're right. Trey Shupak's definitely a guy. I mean, he's on the 40-man roster. I think he's somebody that we need to pay close attention to. And Corey Ray was not – well, he was a T-Rat technically in the postseason, right? In
we count him.
2016. So he was a T-Rat. It might have been brief, but he was. People forget about Corey Ray. And I think there are some people that forget about Corey Ray because he hasn't had the big career yet in the minor leagues. But it's largely been associated with health. And I think that gets lost in the shuffle with Corey Ray a lot. Corey Ray has not been healthy for a good chunk of his professional career. He's been healthy one time for an entire season. It was 2018. He was a Southern League Player of the Year, and he led the Southern League in a ton of offensive categories. He had a big, big year in 2018. Last year, starts in AAA, and we're thinking, hey, he's got a chance. And he gets hurt, never really got a season back on track. He has some swing and miss in that swing. But you know what? A lot of guys do in baseball in this day and age. That's you hear people say that, and sometimes I say, well, show me a guy that doesn't have some swing and miss in their swing right now. I mean, strikeouts are way up. Guys are throwing 99 miles an hour, rolling out of bed and throwing 100. That's just a byproduct of the game and the way we play it today. So it doesn't bother me as much as maybe it would have 15 years ago, right? Because it's the way the game's going. So I still think Corey Ray has a chance to be a tremendous defender, and I think he has a lot of power, and I think he's a guy that still can help the Brewers before it's all said and done. He needs to be healthy, and Corey's a really grounded individual. I mean, he has good perspective, and he has good mentorship. Curtis Granderson's one of his mentors, and I can't think of a better guy to have mentoring a young baseball player like Corey Ray. And so I still have a lot of confidence that Corey Ray is going to get there at some point. And let me correct myself. I said Helena. As you know, Chris, it's Colorado Springs now.
Yep.
So there you go.
It is.
I realized, look at that.
Careful.
Knocked over my, yeah, we're good.
Yeah.
It's a balancing act.
Yeah, and then 2 Arizona League teams down in the Arizona League, and you have a Dominican, the complex down there, and the Brewers really do take care of their minor league affiliates. And I guess, you've been to Colorado Springs when they were the AAA. You've been just about every place in the organization. What really stands out as far as the affiliates? You don't need to go through, compare and contrast all of them, but what is there anything that particularly stands out with the relationship between the affiliates and the Milwaukee Brewers?
Yeah, well, I just think the player development part of it's fun. The Brewers have such great managers. I mean, I love Matt Erickson. Obviously, he's one of my favorite guys in the organization. Likable, I think, just a tremendous guy for that level. And we get a chance to have him up with the big league club in September once in a while, and he's a breath of fresh air. He's fun to have around the ball club. And then when I think of AAA, I mean, it's Rick Sweet, man. He's one of the best dudes in the game. And again, perfect for that level of baseball. Rick Sweet is a straight shooter, and I love going into his office and shutting the door and having him give me okay, here's what's going on. Here's what we think of this guy. Here's what this guy needs to work on. He gives you a lot of good information. So those are 2 guys specifically that stand out to me. Obviously, I love the ballpark in Appleton, Chris. I just think what you guys have there I've been there for multiple games, the fan support, the game day experience, the facilities, it's outstanding. And I just think the Midwest League in general is really cool. It's a neat league. Then you look at Carolina. I've been to Carolina each of the last couple of years in Zebulon, and that's a really first off, the Mudcat brand is one of the better brands in minor league baseball. I love that ballpark. It's got its own uniqueness to it, and it's kind of out in the country a little bit. It's hot there in the summer, but that's a fun place. Joe Aralt's a great manager once again. And then AA Biloxi, that's a wonderful ballpark. The setting's great. I mean, you get the Gulf just beyond the fences a little ways, obviously, and that's just a cool place. It's been a great place for the Brewers from a AA standpoint. So they're very lucky. And AAA's in San Antonio. The ballpark's a little bit older, but it's a great city, a great AAA city to be in. And the PCL's a fun league too, because you get a lot of cool markets that you get to go to if you're in the PCL. So talking about the major ones there, Colorado Springs obviously is very cool. It's one of the greatest mascots going right now in Toasty. And then you keep going on down. I mean, I came last year to Arizona to see Ethan Small's debut with the Arizona Rookie League Club. Of course, they have 2 of them now. So that was really cool. It was really hot, but it was really cool to come back to American Family Fields of Phoenix and see Ethan Small make his debut. The Brewers were in town playing the Diamondbacks, and Bob was on the trip, so I called one of the games on the trip, but I wasn't calling that night, and the rookie ball game started an hour earlier than the Brewers game, so I went over and I checked out Ethan Small's first 2 innings, and then I went over and got to Chase Field in time for the Brewers game. So that was a really cool trip and really fun. So it's awesome. I mean, I love it. Again, going back to what I was saying about my path, I didn't come up through the minors. So for me to come back now and get a chance to check out some of these minor league facilities and organizations and the minor league life, I really enjoy it. It's very educational for me. I get to know a lot of these prospects really well. And so when they get to Milwaukee, I can hit the ground running with them because they've seen me before and I'm a familiar face. A couple of years ago, Brett Phillips, when he was coming up and he'd made his debut with the Brewers in 2018, it was kind of funny because here's Brett Phillips. He had made his debut, and he didn't know that many guys. I mean, he knows the guys because he's going through spring training with these guys, but I'm one of the guys he knows that's not in uniform. And so we get on the bus, and he's like, hey, sit with me. And I'm like, why? You're a player. You don't need to have me sit with you. He's like, no, I'm comfortable with you, so just sit with me, you know. So those are the kind of things that are kind of fun about me coming out and checking out all the different minor league facilities and getting to know some of the guys as they come up through the system. I really enjoy it.
You went viral on social media during the last couple of weeks. Are your Christmas lights up, or has anybody in your neighborhood put their Christmas lights up?
Mine are up. My neighbor has his up as well, and that's it in our neighborhood. So I don't think I had that big of an influence on my neighborhood. But it was really kind of a funny thing, Chris. I mean, people that know me know I don't like heights, so I don't get up on ladders if I don't have to. And my neighbor who put his lights up, he put mine up a year ago because I did such a bad job. I would just put stuff like on the bushes, right? Or I do one of those projection screens on the house, and he's like, "Come on, man, let's do this right." So he put mine up a year ago. This year, I put my own lights up for Christmas because I was like, I'm not going to have him do that. I have a little bit of pride. So I did put my own up this year. And then, so I sent this tweet. I didn't expect it to get any kind of a reaction. I thought a few people might laugh at it, maybe smile or go, yeah, that's a good idea. But I didn't think people would really do it. And I sent it like 5 o'clock on a Sunday. And as the night wore on, I started seeing some likes and some replies, and a lot of replies of, hey, I never took mine down, so I'll just turn them back on. But by the time I woke up the next morning, I was getting pictures of people's displays. They'd gone out and they'd put their lights up, and some of them were pretty elaborate. And then by the next day, there was a story on it. And by the next day, it was everywhere. CNN did a story on it. Fox News did a story on it. And I started getting phone calls. The Washington Post called me, and I didn't really know what to do with it. So finally, I looked at my wife and said, we got to put our lights up. I can't do all these interviews and not have my own lights up. So I went out and I put mine up, and my neighbor put his up as well. And it's a fairly humble. I didn't get too crazy with it because, again, I'm not that talented at it. But the lights are up. They're going to stay up until this thing's over. I do think it was kind of a fun deal. I think it did bring some joy to some people. I think it gave some people something to do, too, which we're all looking for that right now. So it was fun. I kind of laughed at it a little bit because I was really shocked that it took off like it did. And but if it had a positive impact on people, then I'm glad that it did, and I'm glad I can participate in it.
It's always good to trend on Twitter when it's positive instead of negative.
That's kind of the goal, right?
Yeah, exactly. Lane, we've already kept you way past what I told you, but it's been very enjoyable. And traditionally for the last piece of the Welcome Home Banquet interview, I always ask our guests to give some advice to the 2020 Timber Rattlers. Usually they're all in the same room, but we don't know who those guys are going to be right now. Right. But if you could just give some advice to the 2020 Timber Rattlers as kind of as an end to the Welcome Home Banquet this year, that would be much appreciated.
Well, I would just tell those guys, enjoy this ride and this journey. You're getting to play professional baseball, and that's pretty unique. That's pretty cool. And you're climbing that ladder. Everybody has the same goal. They want to get to the big leagues. They want to be able to have an impact with what is an unbelievable ball club in the Milwaukee Brewers. But enjoy this moment, too. And I think the more – look, I wasn't a professional baseball player, so I can't give you a lot of tips on your swing or anything like that. But I just think in life that you succeed more if you make the most out of where you're at and enjoy where you're at and you stay in that moment. And I think you're in a great place right now. This is a great fan base. This is a great organization in the Wisconsin Timber Rattlers. You're going to play in front of great crowds and enjoy this. Get lost in it a little bit. Have fun with it. And I think if you do that, you're going to have a successful season, and you're going to look back on your time as a Wisconsin Timber Rattler, and you're always going to smile. I mean, I still talk to big league guys all the time that talk about those fun stops along the way, and the fun stories that have come out of it, and the clubhouse time and the relationships they formed. And a lot of those guys talk about Wisconsin when they talk about that. So make sure you take in this moment and this season, and you stay in the moment and enjoy it.
Lane, thank you very much for being part of this virtual Welcome Home Banquet, and we look forward to having you come back up, when you have a chance to check out the Timber Rattlers this season and bring the whole family.
Can't wait to do it. Looking forward to it, Chris.
All right. And that will do it for this virtual Welcome Home Banquet dinner. Thanks to Lane Grindle. You can hear him on the Brewers radio broadcasts. And until next time, Timber Rattlers fans, we'll see you at the ballpark.